Imagine an alternate universe for a second.
Okay, I'm with you.
In this universe, the absolute worst real estate on Earth. I mean, the jagged, unfarmable, completely isolated cliffs.
Right. The places where building a road is just, an absolute engineering nightmare.
Exactly. Imagine if that terrible geography was actually the ultimate predictor of a nation's wealth.
Which is wild to think about.
It is, because if you look at a standard map of, say, Europe or Asia or the Americas, that idea is completely laughable.
Oh, totally. Flat equals rich and mountains equal poor.
Right. It's like one of the most foundational rules of human civilization. But today, we are looking at the one massive continent on planet Earth where that map is violently flipped upside down.
It's a stunning paradox. It fundamentally defies all conventional wisdom.
So welcome to the deep dive.
Uh-huh.
Today, we are jumping into a groundbreaking 2009 study by researchers Nathan Nunn from Harvard and Diego Puga from the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid.
Yeah, their paper's called Ruggedness, the Blessing of Bad Geography in Africa. And it's our manual for today.
Our mission here is to figure out how the absolute worst, most punishing geography on the planet became Africa's ultimate wealth generator hundreds of years later.
Right, and the central question they set out to answer is one that's really haunted development economists for decades.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, does geography dictate a country's wealth directly, like by physically restricting modern productivity? Or does it dictate wealth indirectly by shaping historical events that eventually determine a country's fate?
And for a long time, scholars just couldn't isolate those two effects, right? The cause and effect chain was just too tangled up.
Exactly. You couldn't peel them apart in a mathematical model. But this research found the perfect, albeit incredibly tragic, entry point to untangle them.
I promise you, everything you think you know about why countries are rich or poor is about to get a severe reality check.
Oh, a total face slap to standard economics.
Yeah. This isn't just a geology lesson about rocks and dirt. We're talking about 500 years of desperate survival. We're talking about the horrific theft of millions of human lives.
And really the invisible economic force field left in the wake of all that trauma.
Right. But to really understand the sheer scale of this African paradox, we first need to unpack the baseline rule for the rest of the world.
Yeah, we have to look at why rugged terrain is usually an absolute death sentence for a developing economy.
Right, let's start there. Because the physical toll that irregular terrain demands from a society is just staggering.
It really is. I mean, we're looking at the fundamental building blocks of an economy here. Agriculture, infrastructure, trade.
So let's start with the dirt itself, farming.
Yeah, when you have irregular terrain, cultivation doesn't just become slightly more difficult. The costs skyrocket on a geometric curve.
Because you're fighting gravity at every step.
Exactly. On steep slopes, controlling water for irrigation becomes an engineering nightmare. And topsoil erosion is just this constant existential hazard.
And the researchers cite data from the Food and Agriculture Organization that honestly blows my mind.
The slope data, right?
Yeah. They point out that if a slope is just 2 degrees,
Which is nothing. That's barely a slant.
right, you might not even notice walking up it. But at just 2 degrees, the benefits of cultivation often don't even cover the necessary costs of doing it.
Because the water runs off too fast, the nutrients wash away. You can't even use traditional draft animals effectively.
It's wild, and the data gets even more severe. What happens at 6 degrees?
At a slope greater than 6 degrees, cultivation becomes physically impossible on a commercial scale.
Wow.
Yeah, the natural environment just puts a hard physical cap on the potential of the land. But agriculture is really just the first domino to fall.
Because you have to move the stuff you grow.
Right. Think about the infrastructure required. Because of the enormous costs involved in earthwork, I mean, the digging, the leveling, blasting through solid rock building costs in rugged terrain are exponentially higher.
It makes me think of playing a video game on nightmare mode.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Imagine you're trying to build a modern economy from scratch, but the developers disabled the fast travel feature, and every single step you take costs you a percentage of your health.
Exactly. You want to build a simple 2-lane highway. It costs 10 times as much as it does on the plains.
You want to move goods from a port city up to a mountain community? Trade basically dies before it even starts.
Because the friction of transportation over that kind of irregular terrain is just agonizingly slow.
And expensive.
So it's like a permanent geographical tax on every single transaction.
It is. And the study actually highlights research focused on Papua New Guinea, to illustrate this baseline rule.
Oh, yeah, tell me about that.
Well, in Papua New Guinea, steep terrain not only makes producing cash crops incredibly difficult, but it makes transporting them to a market town practically impossible.
So the farmers are completely isolated.
Exactly. And the end result is universally lower incomes, stunted economic growth, and significantly poorer health outcomes for the populations trapped there.
Geography acts as a physical shackle.
Right. That is the universal rule. Which brings us to the massive, glaring contradiction at the heart of this deep dive.
The African paradox.
Yes. If this rugged terrain physically caps a nation's modern potential, if it acts as this permanent, heavy tax on every road built and every crop planted, why on earth are the highly rugged African countries performing so much better economically than the flat African countries?
Right. It makes no sense.
To understand that, we have to stop looking at the rocks in the soil. We have to look at the historical abyss.
We have to zoom out and look at a 500-year window, roughly from the year 1400 to 1900.
Because during this half millennium, the African continent was subjected to an extraction of human capital that is just completely unparalleled in global history.
We are talking about 4 simultaneous, massive slave trades.
4 distinct systems of human trafficking operating at the exact same time, pulling from every direction.
Yeah, you had the transatlantic slave trade pulling millions toward the Americas. You had the trans-Saharan trade pulling populations north across the desert.
Right.
You had the Red Sea trade, and you had the Indian Ocean slave trade pulling from the eastern coast.
And the numbers are just horrific. The researchers note that over 18 million human beings were violently stolen from the continent during this period.
And we really have to remember that figure of 18 million only represents those who survived the initial capture and the forced migration.
Right, millions more perished in the horrific violence of the raids, the forced marches, the holding pens.
The scale of that demographic trauma is almost impossible for the human brain to fully process.
It really is. Think about what the rest of the world was doing during that exact same 500-year window.
Europe and Asia were experiencing massive population explosions.
Exactly. They were going through the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the Industrial Revolution. Wealth and human capital were compounding everywhere else.
Meanwhile, Africa's entire population flatlined. For half a millennium, the population hovered completely stagnant at roughly 50 to 70 million people.
The demographic engine of the entire continent was essentially stalled by pure violence.
And the societal devastation went far beyond just the missing labor force.
What do you mean?
Well, when a society is subjected to constant, unpredictable raiding, political institutions completely collapse. Large-scale state formation becomes impossible.
Because you can't build a state if you're constantly under attack.
Right. Entire civilizations fragmented and shattered into smaller, hyper-defensive bands, just trying to survive the next night.
And here is where the physical geography comes back into the story in the darkest, most twisted way imaginable.
Yeah.
In any normal era of human history, flat, fertile plains are the ultimate prize. The river valleys, the open savannas, that is the cradle of civilization.
That's where you build great cities and trade networks.
Exactly. But during this 500-year nightmare, those beautiful flatlands became something else entirely.
They became an open, defenseless hunting ground. Yeah. The historical texts clarify that the most common method of enslavement wasn't, a formal declared war between 2 massive standing armies.
It wasn't battles.
No. It was through surprise raids and targeted kidnappings. Armed groups would sweep into a village, capture as many people as possible, and vanish.
Just hit and run.
Right. Sometimes it was one ethnic group raiding a neighboring one, and as the pressure and demand for captives grew, you even saw raids occurring within the same ethnic groups.
So in that environment of constant, unpredictable predation, being out in the open on a flat, fertile plain was essentially a death sentence.
Exactly. The natural advantage of the plains, the ease of movement, was weaponized against the people living there.
Because the slavers could move their horses, their weapons, and their captive caravans with minimal resistance.
Rightly.
So if the flatlands were a deadly trap, where did the survivors go?
They fled to the exact places that we just established are terrible for long-term economic development. They fled to the rugged, punishing, unfarmable terrain.
Because when the world feels like it's ending, the absolute worst real estate on the planet becomes the best panic room.
This is the moment the script completely flips. This is the origin of the paradox.
Suddenly, a jagged cliff that makes road building impossible. That is no longer an economic hindrance. That's a watchtower.
Yes. A steep, rocky ravine with massive soil erosion where you can't grow crops. That is a fortress.
The specific historical accounts cited by Nunn and Puga give us such a visceral sense of what this looked like on the ground.
Yeah, they reference the work of historian Thierno Mukhtarba.
Right, and he describes how caverns, caves, and cliff walls were transformed into permanent places of refuge.
In southeastern Senegal, archaeologists can actually still find traces of these Tata walls.
Mahata walls.
Yeah, they're defensive stone structures built right near hidden cave systems where the Basardi people retreated to escape from Fulani slave raids.
Oh, wow. And the study also brings up the Dogon people in Mali, which is such a powerful example.
It really is. The historical texts detail how the Dogon utilized the military crests of the uneven terrain.
So they use the literal shape of the rocks?
Exactly. Against the specific weapons and the cavalry-based techniques of the raiding parties at that time, those rocky crests made the Dogon communities totally impregnable.
Because the slavers simply couldn't maneuver their horses or forces up the cliffs.
Right. This requires a complete suspension of our modern economic common sense.
It really does. The very terrain that makes modern trade impossible, the terrain that historically starves an economy of resources and connection,
Was the exact terrain that preserved human life.
it kept families and communities together.
It protected the basic, fundamental fabric of those societies from being obliterated. The ruggedness broke the mobility of the predators.
It's a total face slap to traditional development economics.
Totally.
But as fascinating and harrowing as these historical accounts are, Nunn and Puga are empirical economists. They are data people.
Right. They don't just rely on historical anecdotes.
No. The challenge they faced was, how do you actually put a mathematical number on survival?
Because you can't just pull up a topographic map, point to Mount Kilimanjaro and say, okay, massive mountain equals safe.
Right. You don't measure the giant famous peaks. You have to measure the hiding spots.
And quantifying a hiding spot across an entire massive continent is a brutal methodological challenge.
How do they do it?
Well, to solve it, they turned to a highly granular global elevation dataset called GTOPO30.
Okay, GTOPO30.
Yeah, and this isn't your standard wall map. GTOPO30 maps the entire surface of the Earth using a grid spaced at 30 arc seconds.
Okay, let's translate that for anyone who isn't a cartographer. What is a 30 arc second grid?
It means they're checking the elevation of the Earth roughly every 926 meters.
Oh, wow. So just under a single kilometer.
Exactly. They are throwing a massive microscopic net over the entire globe.
Okay, and then what?
And at every single one of those center points on that grid, the algorithm calculates the exact elevation difference between that specific point and the 8 points immediately surrounding it.
Like a compass, north, south, east, west, and the 4 diagonals?
Yes. They take the square root of the sum of the squared differences in elevation between the center point and its neighbors.
That is some intense 3D Pythagorean theorem going on.
It is. They are measuring the exact severity of the jaggedness in every direction, every 900 meters.
That's incredible.
What's truly brilliant about this approach is the origin of the formula itself.
Where did it come from?
This specific mathematical index was originally designed by wildlife biologists.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it was created to measure topographic heterogeneity in animal habitats. It's basically a mathematical way to figure out how many nooks, crannies, and physical hiding spots exist in a specific terrain for prey animals to hide from predators.
Wow. Stop and think about the dark poetry of that for a second.
I know.
The economists took a mathematical formula designed to find where animals hide from wolves or lions, and they applied it to human beings hiding from slave catchers.
Because, as we said, they aren't looking for a massive continuous mountain range like the Alps. They're looking for a 20-foot rocky outcrop.
Right. They're looking for a steep, jagged gully where a family could stay completely out of sight for 3 days while a raiding party passes by on the plains above.
And the granularity of that measurement is what makes the resulting data so powerful. They take that micro-level ruggedness index and average it across all the grid cells within a modern country's borders.
And the results they get from running this data provide the ultimate statistical shock.
It's the most face-slapping data visualization in the whole paper.
Okay, let's visualize this for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Imagine a scatter plot graph with 2 variables. Terrain ruggedness is on the x-axis, and modern economic income is on the y-axis.
Okay.
For every single country outside of Africa, as terrain ruggedness increases, the data line points violently down.
The coefficient is negative 0.203. Ruggedness strictly means poverty.
But then you look at the exact same scatter plot for the countries inside Africa.
And the line points violently up.
Up. Huh.
Yes, in Africa, as terrain ruggedness increases, modern per capita income goes up. The coefficient flips to a positive 0.190.
The space between those two lines, the massive gap between the downward global slope and the upward African slope, represents the economic echo of millions of human lives saved by rocks.
It's just staggering when you see it graphed out like that.
That visual gives me absolute chills. Two totally opposite trajectories.
But look, the moment you publish a massive claim like rocks make African countries rich today because they stopped slave traders hundreds of years ago, the academic skeptics are going to line up around the block.
Of course, human nature demands an easier, less historical explanation. My brain immediately goes to natural resources. The skeptics are going to say, wait a minute, we are talking about Africa. It's not the rocks protecting people. This data is probably just accidentally drawing a map of diamond mines and oil reserves.
Exactly. And a rigorous economic study has to anticipate exactly that kind of pushback.
Which they did.
Oh, absolutely. Section 5 of Nunn and Puga's paper is essentially a mathematical gauntlet. They run a series of intense robustness checks to ensure that this mysterious ruggedness wealth bonus isn't actually just a statistical proxy for something much more mundane.
They have to prove the rocks are the cause, not just a coincidence.
Right.
So let's walk through these counter-arguments because it is fascinating to watch the researchers systematically dismantle them. Counter-argument number 1, the resource curse.
Right. Skeptics say, hey, maybe these extremely rugged areas just happen to be sitting on top of massive diamond deposits, and the diamonds are driving the GDP.
So how did they disprove that?
Well, they integrated specific, granular data on diamond extraction. They literally measured the carats of gem-quality diamonds extracted per square kilometer in every country between 1958 and 2000.
Okay.
And then they ran the regression model again, explicitly testing the classic resource curse theory.
Which is the idea that diamonds might increase income outside of Africa, but actually decrease it inside Africa due to corruption and poor institutions, right?
Exactly. So they mathematically filtered out the effect of the diamonds, and the result, the ruggedness bonus, remains completely unchanged.
Wow. So the data clearly shows the wealth is not coming from the gems in the ground.
Not at all.
Okay, moving on to counter-argument number 2, soil fertility. Someone might argue, okay, no diamonds. But maybe the mountainous regions in Africa, like the Great Rift Valley, just happen to have incredibly fertile volcanic soil, and that is what's driving the agricultural wealth.
And the researchers controlled for that, too. They mapped the exact percentage of each country that features fertile soil.
How do you even define that mathematically?
They specifically defined it as soil with no severe constraints for growing rain-fed crops. So they factored that massive agricultural variable into the equation.
Whoa.
Once again, the ruggedness bonus stands firm. It isn't a byproduct of better farming dirt.
Okay, counter-argument number 3, the tropics and disease. We know that high altitudes are generally cooler, so the argument goes, mountains are cooler, so there are fewer mosquitoes, which means fewer tropical diseases like malaria. The populations are healthier, so the economy is stronger.
To test the disease hypothesis, they calculated the exact percentage of each country's landmass that falls within a tropical climate zone.
Oh, they mapped out the tropics.
Yeah, and they went even further and explicitly controlled for indices of malaria transmission stability, as well as the country's pure distance from the equator.
So they mathematically stripped away all the biological benefits of cooler weather.
They did. And still, the ruggedness bonus completely ignores it. The positive coefficient stays incredibly robust, hovering around 0.302 to 0.414.
What about the ocean? Counter-argument number 4, the coastline. We know historically that being near the ocean or navigable rivers is the ultimate cheat code for global trade.
Right.
So the skeptics might say maybe the rugged countries just happen to be the coastal countries.
They measured the average distance to the nearest ice-free coast for every single country in the dataset. They factored international trade access into the math.
Let me guess.
Yep. The ruggedness bonus persists, completely untouched by coastline proximity.
Okay, but what if the data is just being manipulated by weird statistical outliers? Like, I'm thinking of tiny, weirdly rich island nations that happen to be volcanic, or a country that is 99% mountain. A few extreme examples can pull an entire continent's average out of whack.
This is where they bring in the heavy statistical artillery. They systematically pruned the data to ensure it was a widespread phenomenon, not a fluke.
So they chopped off the extremes.
Exactly. First, they removed the 10 smallest countries by landmass, completely eliminating anomalies like the Seychelles. Then, they removed the 10 most rugged countries in the dataset, places like Lesotho, where the extreme terrain might skew the math.
And they also use a specific statistical tool here, right? Something called a Box-Cox transformation.
Yes, a zero-skewness Box-Cox power transformation.
Okay, what does that actually mean?
Think of it essentially as a mathematical shock absorber. In any massive data set, you have extreme variables that can aggressively warp a standard linear model.
Right, one billionaire walks into a bar, and suddenly the average income of the bar is $1 million.
Exactly. The Box-Cox transformation reshapes the distribution of the data so that it follows a more normal bell curve shape.
Got it.
It mathematically guarantees that a few crazy outliers cannot artificially manufacture this ruggedness bonus.
And the result?
Even after applying this shock absorber, taking out every extreme country, controlling for every diamond, soil type, and mosquito, this African ruggedness bonus remains massive and highly statistically significant.
So the physical environment, the natural resources, and the statistical anomalies have all been ruled out.
All of them.
But what about the human element of colonization? Could this just be a massive colonial hangover? Like maybe the European colonizers just couldn't conquer the mountainous regions as easily with their military logistics, so those rugged areas kept more of their independence and wealth?
It's a smart question, and they tested the colonial timeline as well. They factored in the specific identity of the colonizer for each nation, whether they were British, French, Portuguese, or Spanish.
Okay.
And they controlled for the different European legal frameworks left behind. The coefficient does not budge. The geography didn't protect them from the colonizers in a way that produced this specific wealth bonus.
The meticulousness of this debunking is incredible. They just knock down every single excuse.
But the ultimate proof, the absolute nail in the coffin for all of these alternative geological and historical theories is what happens when they look beyond the shores of Africa.
Right, because if mountains inherently provide some magical, unmeasured benefit, like a secret mineral we haven't discovered, or an unrecorded weather phenomenon.
We would see this exact same wealth bonus in the Andes of South America. We would see it in the Himalayas of Asia.
But we don't, do we?
No, that is the ultimate control group. They ran the exact same regressions on every other continent on Earth. Europe, Asia, the Americas, Oceania.
Yeah.
In the rest of the world, the ruggedness wealth bonus simply does not exist.
Okay.
It is exclusively 100% an African phenomenon.
Oh.
By proving it doesn't happen anywhere else, they completely eliminate all global geographic explanations. They mathematically lock the cause to an event that uniquely and exclusively happened to the African continent.
The 4 massive slave trades.
Precisely that. The historical trauma is the only variable left in the room.
And the data isn't just solid on a broad continent-wide level. When you actually zoom in on the map of Africa, the geographic data perfectly, chillingly aligns with the historical map of the pain.
Yeah, this is where the precision gets really eerie.
Because where the pain of the slave trade was the absolute deepest, the rocks provided the highest economic multiplier.
Exactly. When you break the African continent down by region, the narrative becomes undeniable. Let's look at West Africa.
West Africa was the absolute epicenter of the horrific transatlantic slave trade.
The sheer volume of human beings stolen from the West African coast and the interior was staggering compared to other regions. And when you look at the economic data today,
West Africa has the highest economic ruggedness bonus on the entire continent.
yes, the coefficient they found there was over 0.5. The protection of the terrain paid the highest dividends where the threat was the most severe.
But then you pan the camera up to North Africa.
North Africa presents the perfect internal control group. Due to its geography and historical political structures, North Africa was basically completely untouched by the specific types of slave raids that devastated the western, central, and eastern regions of the continent.
Right, the trans-Saharan trade moved through there, but the local populations weren't the ones being hunted in the same way.
Exactly. The constant existential threat of local capture and export just wasn't a factor in their daily survival over those 500 years.
So the realization here is stark. In North Africa, the ruggedness bonus is exactly 0.
0.
Because there were no slave raiders hunting people on the plains, the rocks didn't save anyone's life. They were just rocks.
They just made farming difficult and building roads expensive.
In North Africa, rugged terrain is just an economic penalty, exactly like it is in Europe or Asia.
It's a perfect, tragic geographic fingerprint of history.
Mhm.
The terrain only generated future wealth in the specific zip codes where it was forced to act as a military shield.
That is just It's heavy.
It is. But to truly understand the mechanics of this, there is a massive missing link we need to discuss.
Right. We have established that the slave trade stole millions of bodies, and the mountains prevented some of that theft. But how exactly does the theft of human beings in the year 1700 translate to massive national poverty in the year 2000?
It's a great question.
Because to understand why the flat countries that couldn't hide are so economically broken today, we have to talk about what the slave trade destroyed besides human life.
The invisible scars, the societal damage that lingers long after the physical violence stops.
The invisible glue that holds any functioning country together. The true villain of modern poverty identified in this research is institutional collapse.
Right. Let's define institutions, because economists throw that word around a lot and it can sound a bit abstract.
Yeah, we aren't talking about physical buildings like universities or central banks.
No, we are talking about the invisible rules of the game. We are talking about trust, the foundational belief in a legal system, contract enforcement, the belief that your property is yours.
And how did the researchers measure that?
They use the World Bank's rule of law indicator to measure this quantitatively. It measures the extent to which everyday people have confidence in and abide by the rules of their society. The courts, the police, the property rights.
To understand how the slave trade destroyed the rule of law, I think of it almost like a severe autoimmune disease.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to put it.
Because it wasn't just an external attack by a foreign virus. The constant, overwhelming threat forced the societal body to attack its own cells just to survive.
Destroying the internal systems that needed to thrive later.
Exactly.
That autoimmune analogy is devastatingly accurate. Think about the mechanics of survival during the slave trades. To avoid being captured themselves, or to acquire the guns necessary to defend their villages from European or trans-Saharan merchants, communities often had to turn on each other.
Neighboring tribes raided each other to secure captives to trade.
It bred a culture of intense, generation-spanning paranoia. Neighbors turned on neighbors. In the most desperate scenarios, local leaders sold their own people and families fractured under the pressure.
So baseline human trust totally evaporates.
Completely.
Let's imagine a hypothetical scenario to ground this. Imagine two merchants in the year 1800 living in villages on opposite sides of a flat, open valley. They want to trade grain for iron. But because the valley is a known hunting ground for slavers, and because anyone you meet might capture you to save themselves, neither merchant will cross the valley.
They stay put.
Right. They don't make the trade. They don't sign a contract.
And if you extrapolate that across millions of people over hundreds of years, you see the death of the state.
Because without foundational trust between strangers, you cannot have a functioning legal system.
If you can't trust the judge, you can't enforce a contract. If you can't enforce a contract, you can't safely build a business or hire employees.
And if you can't build a business, you can't have a modern, taxable economy.
The slave trade didn't just steal labor. It injected a psychological and institutional poison into the social fabric that prevented functioning governments from forming for centuries.
And Nunn and Puga's data proves this is the exact mechanism. This is the absolute smoking gun of the whole paper.
It really is.
We talked about all those mathematical robustness checks earlier, but watch what happens when they run the ultimate test. When they take their regression model and they explicitly add the historical data of slave exports into the mathematical equation. What happens to that magical African ruggedness bonus?
It completely zeroes out.
Oof, gone.
It vanishes from the model. The statistical coefficient drops from this massive, highly significant number down to basically nothing. From 0.3 to 1 down to 0.047, losing all statistical significance.
Let's make sure the weight of that lands. The absolute only reason rocks make you rich in Africa today is because they stopped slave exports.
That's the only reason.
Once you mathematically account for the fact that a specific country exported fewer slaves, the mountains go back to being an economic penalty. The math proves, with 100% certainty, that the rugged terrain's entire benefit was channeled exclusively through acting as a shield against slavers.
It is some of the most irrefutable causal evidence you will ever see in macroeconomic history.
It's airtight.
The three-stage chain links perfectly. High ruggedness directly deterred slave exports. Lower slave exports meant significantly less destruction of trust and institutions.
And better institutions today mean a higher rule of law, which directly translates to higher modern per capita income.
The rocks save the institutions.
So What does this all mean for the actual human beings living in these countries today? Let's play God with the timeline for a minute. Let's create an alternate universe simulation based on their data.
Okay, I love this part.
What if those slave ships never dropped anchor? What if the trans-Saharan caravans never arrived?
The researchers actually built a staggering economic simulation to answer exactly that question. They wanted to measure the modern financial cost of the trauma.
So how did they set up the simulation?
They took an average African country from their data set, one with a mean level of historical slave exports, and the average log real GDP per person today.
Which in the year 2000, when this particular data set was anchored, was about $1,784 per person.
Yes. They run the mathematical simulation where they dial the slave exports for that hypothetical country down to absolute zero.
Yep.
They literally erase the history.
And the result?
That country's modern per capita income skyrockets. It jumps from $1,784 to $4,149.
The average citizen's wealth more than doubles.
Just like that.
The GDP explodes simply by mathematically erasing that one historical nightmare.
And the researchers take it one step further. You can actually put a specific modern dollar value on the rocks themselves.
Wait, really? How?
If you look at the historical data, every standard deviation of extra rugged terrain a country had, every extra cluster of ravines, every extra set of cliffs translated to a massive reduction in the number of human beings captured.
Right.
In today's money, the economic preservation provided by that extra ruggedness translates to an extra $747 in the pocket of an average citizen today.
That is profound. The rocks literally paid dividends across centuries.
They did.
500 years later, those 20-foot outcrops, those military crests in Mali, those cave systems in Senegal, are functionally still handing out $747 checks to the modern descendants of the people they hid.
The implications of this study are so massive that it actually reframes a major ongoing debate happening right now at the highest levels of global economics and policy.
Oh, you were talking about the famous clash between the Jeffrey Sachs camp and the William Easterly camp.
What?
Right. Two heavyweight economists warring for years over how to fix global poverty, and this paper lands right in the middle of their battlefield.
Exactly. So Jeffrey Sachs, who wrote The End of Poverty, he looks at the world and argues that geography is a direct modern trap.
How does he frame it?
He says, look at these poor nations. Bad geography causes poverty today. The tropical malaria, the poor soil, the landlocked borders, these are physical traps that people cannot escape on their own.
So his solution is foreign aid, right?
Yes. He says the only way to save these countries is massive, coordinated foreign aid. We need to send billions of dollars to build infrastructure and overcome the physical geography.
But then you have William Easterly, who wrote The White Man's Burden. Easterly looks at the exact same map of the world and says, no, Sachs is wrong. It's not the current physical geography holding them back.
He argues it is the history. Bad history ruined their institutions and their rule of law.
And because their governments are structurally broken, Easterly argues that pumping in massive amounts of foreign aid is largely useless or even actively harmful because it just gets swallowed by corruption and props up bad leaders.
Right. And what this incredibly elegant study by Nunn and Puga proves is that both Sachs and Easterly are partly right, but both are missing the full, complex picture.
The reality is messier.
Much messier.
Mm-hmm.
Geography shaped the history, and the history shaped the institutions.
So geography is both a modern physical shackle,
Which Sachs is right about. That's the direct negative effect.
and it's also a historical institutional creator.
Yeah. Which Easterly is right about. That's the indirect positive effect. You simply cannot untangle them. Geography writes the script of history.
It's like a dark cosmic joke played on human history. The absolute worst, most physically punishing geography, imaginable terrain that starves agriculture and destroys roads, became a shield against the absolute worst, most punishing crime imaginable.
And the echo of that violent collision is still strictly defining the wealth of sovereign nations today.
It is a profound and somewhat haunting realization. The slave trade officially ended over a century ago. The raiding parties are long gone. The physical chains are broken.
But the geographic filter that determined who lived, who died, and whose society survived is still secretly mathematically dictating who is rich and who is poor today.
The institutions that were broken on the flatlands have not fully healed. We are quite literally living in the shadow of our ancestors' geography.
And I think that leaves us with a truly vital question for today.
Yeah, because the world is changing faster than ever, and we aren't fighting over physical terrain with cavalry and muskets in the same way anymore, but we are rapidly building entirely new landscapes.
The digital landscape, the new frontier.
Exactly. In our modern era of algorithms, immense digital divides, artificial intelligence, and global data surveillance. What is the new rugged terrain?
Oh, that's a fascinating thought.
What are the new invisible geographic or digital borders that are secretly filtering who is going to survive, who is going to be exploited, and who is going to thrive over the next 500 years?
Are we currently building flat, open digital plains where our data, our privacy, and our wealth are just waiting to be raided by unseen actors?
Or are we finding the digital cliffs, the encryption caves, and the regulatory watchtowers to protect our institutions?
If the history of Africa's ruggedness teaches us anything, it is that the terrain you build your society on determines whether you survive the storms to come. We all need to be asking where our hiding spots are in this new era.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's a massive amount of historical and economic data to process, but sometimes you really do have to turn the map upside down, look past the obvious, and measure the hiding spots to see the truth. We will leave you to mull over that final thought about our digital future. Until next time.